You're obsessed with her, and you're obsessed with her daughter!
All right, easy, Geraldo.
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking Craig Schaefer in white briefs. We're talking a Cronenberg slasher. And we're talking shapeshifters and freaks. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we are talking queer creators getting really viciously manhandled by the studio they're making a movie for. But hello, everyone. We are Joe and Trace, the Horror Queers, part of Bloody Disgusting's Horror Queers podcast network. And with us today is Nightbreed, I'm gonna say super fan, Leigh Monson. They are a queer, non-binary writer of movies with bylines at What to Watch, Polygon, and Slash Film. Hello, Leigh.
Hi, Leigh.
Hello.
Thanks so much for coming on this journey with us.
Of course. Superfan feels a little strong just because I can never remember anyone's names in this movie.
Oh, no.
Valid point.
There's so many characters in this movie.
But I adore this movie mainly for its themes over anything else. So I'm excited to talk with it. With you about it.
I think that's a great starting off point for this. Actually, well, I mean, do we want to do an introduction for the festival or whatever you're doing?
Oh yeah. So before we get into it, folks, this is of course a special edition, obviously video, and we're doing this because this is part of the Frightgown trio of tributes to this film. So I'm very excited to chat a little bit more about it. But Leigh, maybe you can start us off by giving us a bit of an like a primer about how did you first come across this film? What is your relationship to it, and so on?
Sure. So it's funny because my origins with this film are kind of half remembered from childhood. Like they aren't really like strong. I didn't really have a super strong connection with it for most of my life. But then as I was kind of trying to research more queer cinema and figure out stuff that I really enjoyed, particularly in the horror scene, Nightbreed kind of jumped out at me, and I ended up watching the director's cut and fell in love with it. It's one of those films that's like kind of messy, but in a way that speaks to a wealth of ambition. And it doesn't it doesn't fail. It just sort of is like maybe a little too ambitious for its own good in some ways, but that's fine. I like it.
I mean, sorry, nope.
No, it's just a romp. It's it's a romp, and I thoroughly enjoy diving into what the seeming intent was behind a lot of scenes in this thing. Like there's a lot of juicy stuff to dig into in this movie.
There really is, and I do think that, I mean, because this was planned to have sequels. Like a lot of it, we joke about not being able to remember characters' names, but it's also because a lot of these characters were going to have like expanded storylines and potential sequels. I think there was a graphic novel of this movie. Like there was a plan that just didn't come to fruition because this movie bombed, which I don't think is the movie's. Well, I mean, the theatrical cut's fault. It may have been, but
right. I mean, that theatrical cut
is the marketing was terrible for this movie because they tried to sell it as something that it wasn't. Like they tried to sell it as another slasher movie, which there's slasher elements in this movie, but that's not what this is at all.
Yeah, I saw so many stills before I saw this for the first time a couple years ago of David Cronenberg like with the mask, and I always got it confused with the movie Time Crimes because someone in that movie wears a similar mask, and so I was like, what movie is this?
Yeah, I think Buttonface has a great design.
There you go.
But and I think that if you were to create a slasher franchise, he could carry it. But that's not what this movie is. It's actually almost making a commentary on slashers through Cronenberg's character in relation to the monsters of Midian. But I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there.
Totally fine. Yeah, because I mean, all this marketing shit, we will have plenty to discuss because I've got a lengthy production history for this. I mean, maybe not even a history, just the release history. And that's kind of what I find the most fascinating. You know, this is a film that I had heard so much about. And Joe and I, we wrote about it for our Horror Quiz articles before it became a podcast. Or maybe it was like the first year it was a podcast.
Yeah.
But I remember like I never sought this movie out because I was honestly intimidated by how many different cuts there were, which there's three. And I didn't really know how to approach it, and I didn't have a relationship with the source material, the shorts, the novella Cabal. So yeah, and so I saw it for the first time 2 years ago, and I'm kind of on your side with this, where I think it's very ambitious. I don't think it's a failure. I don't fully connect with it, and I'm interested to see how all of us kind of do or don't connect to this film.
Yeah, I agree. I think I like it a little bit more than you, Trace, and maybe not quite as much as you, Leigh, but especially on a rewatch, I found so much more to appreciate and enjoy. This is not a film that plays well on a first watch, in part, I think, because there's still messy parts and there's missing pieces and so on. But like, Barker is really swinging for the fences with this. You can tell, like a lot of his other things, there's a lot of passion here. There's a lot of big ideas. And to try to cram it all into a studio-friendly, mass market-produced film, I mean, I think that there was just something of a disconnect in between the way that Barker wanted this project to come together and then a studio who said, well, we want to make money off of this film. And like the two did not meet in the middle.
Well, this is very much a passion project film. It's like that, it like big capital letters, big neon sign, passion project. Like this is Barker working through some very personal shit, and putting it out there in a way that he felt could communicate that to an audience. And as you alluded to, Trace, that audience is primarily queer. And the studio didn't think that they could sell that.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. I mean, like, because you had a column for Birth Movies Death, RIP, called Queer Underground, where you honestly, we did what we do. Like, you know, we take horror films, we look at queer aspects of them. And I went to go look at our article too, and I was like, you know, the first comment is some douchebag going like, honestly, besides the fact that the creator is gay, what is queer about this movie? I have a gay friend and they didn't even pick up on it. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
I can't. This is like one of the gayest films that we have ever covered.
I think it's pretty obvious. Like the allegory is very much there, but I do also think there's certain things, even lines of dialogue, that it's like, well, if you're queer, you're probably more in tune to pick up on maybe the subtext going on here, or you're reaching.
Yeah. I mean, that's just it. Like, specifically, I remember reading comments for that column, and it was always people thinking I'm reaching. It's like, no, I just have different life experiences than you.
Yep.
That's yes. I can't tell you how many times Joe and I have to say it's not a reach, it is a reading. People with different life experiences have different readings. I don't know how else to put that.
Yeah, and our reading doesn't take anything away from other people's readings. It's just a different perspective on it. And yet that is so threatening to a lot of, unfortunately, straight men who just can't fathom the idea that there might be a different alternative interpretation than theirs.
But also we've got a documented history on our side with this one, so you know.
Yeah.
Well, but that's the thing, right? Like, it takes the creator saying, "This is what I meant," for people for those types of people to even take it seriously. Then like, oh, okay, well, yeah, then the creator said it. That's fine. Like, no, that's not how it works. Intent doesn't always equal like whatever our readings are. But I digress.
we could do a whole podcast about just that idea.
Oh,
Really,
absolutely.
We really could. Yeah.
I would honestly love to do a podcast about comment sections. Let's just like read comments.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that's great.
Here's all the people who think they're dragging me, and here's why they're wrong.
Yeah. It's like mean tweets, but mean comments, which is, you know, obviously there's no shortage of that shit. So, okay. So yes, this film. So on a base level, Clive Barker thought that there was a corner for all of us, within all of us, that envies that we wanted to be monsters, and we envy monsters' powers and would love to live forever, or to fly, or to change shape at will. Me personally, I know that maybe not a monster, but I always grew up wanting to have Matilda's powers, and I guess Matilda's kind of a mutant in that respect. So I will co-sign on that. But he wanted to create a world that we'd feel strangely at home in. So he was interested in creating a horror mythology from the ground up and developing characters that would live on in sequels. As he finished writing the novella Cabal, which Nightbreed is based on, he realized that it would make a good film, and he wanted to direct it himself. He actually originally envisioned a trilogy of films that, unfortunately, we'll never know what those would have entailed. So yeah, it was the first of a planned 3-picture deal that Barker had with Morgan Creek, Joe Ross production company. It included an adaptation of The Son of Celluloid, which is one of his short stories in the Books of Blood, which I would love to see that adapted for film. And a sequel to Nightbreed. The compromise Barker made was to change the title of the film from Cabal to Nightbreed because Morgan Creek insisted on a more commercial title and thought that the original one did not mean anything.
Here we go.
That
It's
to me
begun.
is the first red flag.
Mhm.
I don't think, I mean, admittedly, I haven't read the short story, so I can't say whether or not how true this film is, or the director's cut at least is, to the short story. But if your studio is telling you like the title of the short story doesn't mean anything, that's maybe ding, 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 ding.
I think that this was probably the Americans looking at Hellraiser saying, this is the man who created a horror icon. We would like to do business with this individual. We don't care what it is. We don't know anything about his projects. We don't know anything about his work, but we think he could make us money.
Yeah, well, and also, not to take the studio side here,
Mhm.
but if you're trying to market this as like a Hellraiser-esque horror property, you probably want to put the Nightbreed themselves front and center.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
like Boone doesn't even become Cabal until the end of the movie.
The final, yeah.
And I'm sorry, like Boone is probably one of the least interesting characters in this movie.
Oh boy.
So
At least from like a stylistic marketing perspective.
Right.
I'll put it that way.
But it's also because this movie, so it is an overstuffed film. There are so many characters, and unfortunately, and I don't want to be like this negative Nancy, but I think Craig Sheffer is kind of a charisma vacuum. Like, I don't think he's the most compelling protagonist. I think the character itself you can do something with, but unfortunately, I don't think Sheffer, who I've seen do good work in other things, but like this isn't the reason I enjoy. He's not the reason I enjoy this movie.
No.
I feel like he's a stand-in for the ideas of the film
Yes.
more than a fully realized character, and that's one of the film's weaknesses. Especially because he disappears for like a long stretch of the middle where Laurie becomes the fish out of water character.
Well, and I mean, I don't know about y'all, but do y'all? Because I find Laurie very compelling. I like watching Laurie do things.
I don't mind her, but I'm like, we've got boring white dude and boring lady.
Mhm.
And then we've got this entire troupe of interesting monsters with great prosthetics and like a whole underground world. And I'm just like, why are there even humans in this movie? Like, can't we not just find some other way to get into this world?
Well, I mean, I feel like this was still at a point in time where a lot of films relied on the fish out of water character to introduce fantastical elements,
For sure.
particularly because like sci-fi and fantasy weren't like the pinnacle of the entertainment world yet. Like they weren't literally the only
Right.
big movies that would come out anymore. That's an exaggeration of today, but I
Yeah.
mean it's definitely more true now than it was then.
Yeah.
So I think generally the idea was you need a normie in here in order to sell the weird shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I it's one of those things where I recognize it's a weakness, but it's also forgivable because like it was 1990,
Yeah.
whatever. I
Yeah.
don't know that this movie would exist without it. So
Yeah, and there's definitely more egregious slights against them, at least the studio's attitude towards the monsters, and like when in a second when we get to the marketing, like why this was the case, because it's just like, yeah. So they did give the movie a budget of $11 million, which was a considerable increase from the $2 million that Barker had to work with on Hellraiser, which you can see that budget in the makeup effects for this film,
Oh,
which
yeah.
are
Yeah.
stellar. His goal was to make the Star Wars of horror films, for lack of a better term. The monsters in the book are represented impressionistically over 2 or 3 paragraphs, though. So the challenge Barker faced was to visualize them in greater detail for the film. And I actually think that's a similar thing to what he did with the Hellbound Heart. Like, the Cenobites are similar. Oh.
So find a go back to
The budget. Just I'll start
Sorry.
with
no, you're fine.
No, you're
My
good.
cat was clawing at the door, so I didn't know if that was picking up on the audio.
Oh no, you're fine.
Okay.
So can I just said Star Wars for lack of a better term, and then we'll go. Okay. So one thing though is that the monsters in the book Cabal are represented impressionistically over like 2 or 3 paragraphs. So Barker actually his challenge was to visualize them in much greater detail for the film, which I think that's what he had to do with the Hellbound Heart, because I have read that short story or novella, and I do think that like the Cenobites are similarly described vaguely. Like there's no pinhead Cenobite in Hellbound Heart, so it's like they get to have fun with them. Here it's like increased by like threefold. I'm sorry, way more than that, because we have so many of these creatures. Yeah. So filming took place in London at Pinewood Studios and Slough, I hope I'm saying that right, for the hospital scenes, and in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. He was contractually Barker was contractually obligated to deliver an R-rated film but he was also told to not make it as gory as Hellraiser, which
Sure.
again, it's a weird thing where it's like, well, you can make it R-rated, you just can't make it gory. Well, then why can it be R-rated then?
If I have to take an educated guess, probably marketing. Like they probably wanted to do like toy tie-ins.
Oh my god! Can you imagine?
Yes, actually, I 100% can. Like, think about like some of these creatures are obviously very adult oriented, but like the porcupine lady, that could be a toy where it's like she shoots these things at GI Joes, and
But she's got the
like
titties.
kids, I can
She's
imagine
nude.
kids loving the dude with like the snake tentacles that come out of his stomach. Like that's a toy.
That's the most Hellraiser-y thing in this movie, is that particular Nightbreed. Like that very much reminds me of Dr. Chenard from Hellraiser 2.
correct. Yes.
So yeah, Barker said they filmed this movie like they had like 2 months to get all the special effects in order, blah 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 blah, do all the designs. They previewed the first cut of the film with a temp soundtrack that did not go well. People were very confused by the characters' motives. So Barker made some changes, and the second test screening was much more successful. However, the original ending includes Decker's death, which we see in the director's cut, but that was not well received for some reason, and so Barker changed it. So in the theatrical cut, we do have the priest resurrect David Cronenberg's Dr. Decker. But again, I'm just like, wait, a test audience didn't like that the villain of the film died at the end.
Well, again, if they're trying to sell this as a slasher, they probably want like some reason to continue wanting there to be the slasher around. Like the slasher is not as threatening if he's mortal, I guess, you know, like if he's not a Jason, or if he's not a Michael Myers, which, I mean, whatever. There's a reason that test audiences are not necessarily the best metric of quality.
Yeah.
But
I'm always loath. Like it depends, right? It can go good or it can go bad. Like I've seen things where audiences voted on something in a test screening. I think it was like with Final Destination, with the original ending, where like they fucking hated that stupid sappy cemetery ending, and that's why we got the awesome ending in Paris with the reshoot 6 months later. That's cool. But there are some things where it's like, maybe y'all should trust your gut and just do what's like right for the film instead.
Yeah.
So yeah, in late July of 89, the studio pushed the release date for Nightbreed. It was originally slated to come out in the fall of 89. They moved it to February of 1990 instead, citing in a press release that they sent out, because that's something that happens now. They sent out a press release to be like, oh, we're going to delay the film because of this. They actually give reasons. The complex demands of the film's groundbreaking post-production optical effects, but this also included Star Wars concept artist Ralph McQuarrie's mural and matte paintings that are shown to like with the prophecy stuff that they show, at least in the director's cut. I think most of it is cut from the theatrical cut. But they also had a week of additional shooting in late August that would see key parts of the narrative reshot. Barker shot extra scenes over 3 days in Los Angeles in late '89, which included additional scenes with Cronenberg, which expanded and clarified his character. I think maybe that was maybe the character motivations, where people were like, why is he killing all these people? Why does he want to blame the Nightbreed / queer people for all these problems, for all these deaths?
I wonder if the gas station stuff is part of that, because that seems like it's a big exposition dump that just kind of comes out of nowhere. Like, I'm going to stop. I'm going to cut this guy up randomly, and I'm going to explain why I'm doing all of this.
Well, and I admittedly hadn't thought about this before, but the whole idea of Decker wanting to blame things on Boone. I mean, we've had this discussion before, but it's like, you know, very much for me an AIDS allegory, where it's like, let's blame the queer community for AIDS. So that's kind of like where I take this from, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself too. So Barker's original version ran 2.5 hours. 20th Century Fox, who distributed the film, asked for almost an hour to be cut, and also took issue with the fact that the monsters were the heroes of the film, prompting editor Richard Martin, a frequent Barker collaborator who worked with him on Hellraiser 1 and 2, to quit. The studio brings in Mark Goldblatt, who's actually a frequent collaborator. He's like a big time editor in Hollywood. He's a frequent collaborator with James Cameron and with Paul Verhoeven to complete editing on the film. So they cut it down to 2 hours, and then they cut it again to 102 minutes long, which is the version that was released in theaters. Moving on to marketing, though. So this is where we're going to kind of get in the meat and potatoes of this shit. According to Barker, the studio did not promote it well with posters that misinterpreted the content. When he saw the way they were selling Nightbreed, he freaked out and goes, "What are you doing? This isn't the movie." And he was given all kind of excuses like, well, there isn't time to change it. We have to release it now. We can't redo the marketing for this little movie coming out in like a month. So the head of marketing at Morgan Creek never watched it all the way through because it disgusted and distressed him, according to Barker.
That is hilarious. That is like the most perfect quote for some, like, you should not be working in horror if you cannot handle horror movies. I'm sorry.
And also, like, on the sliding scale, like, he delivered on that not making it super gory promise.
I mean, but even
like,
before
there's bits, but
compared to Hellraiser or Hellraiser 2, which is a lot gorier than the first Hellraiser, but also even when they're going back to like, oh, they didn't like that the monsters were the heroes. I mean, again, did you read the script?
Yeah, and the answer is probably no, or at least like the editor did not. Somebody greenlit this, and then nobody talked to the people down the line.
Which I think is maybe a common trait of Barker properties, because I believe the same thing happened with Hellraiser Bloodline.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't as much involved in that one, but it happens.
Yeah. So yeah, the studio did not understand it. The movie, it had no movie stars. It was violent. It had elements of fantasy and horror, which they saw as a weakness, while Barker saw it as a strength.
1990.
Yep. I mean, again, like, okay, you have this 3-picture deal. You're going to make a sequel with this movie, but you're immediately opposed to the basic concept of it. It makes no fucking sense. So they end up marketing Nightbreed, as Leigh said, as a slasher film with television teasers that were confusing, didn't represent it. The trailer was sent to the MPAA and was rejected 12 times. They forbade any monster footage, and it was cut down to someone being terrorized with a razor, which constituted, as we all know, only 5 minutes of the final product.
Right.
So it was not screened for critics because the studio argued there was no point in showing it to critics because the people who see horror films do not read reviews.
This is just so reflective of where the genre is at, right? Like, we talk frequently about how terrible the 90s are, the early half of the 90s are for horror. And this is coming right at the turn of the decade, and we can start to see all these dominoes falling into effect, right? We're coming off of slashers, so we market this sci-fi horror fantasy movie as a slasher, but also we don't know how to market it because we don't want to offend everybody, because all of the slashers got hacked to bits by censors.
But I think that's also too where it's, I mean, we've talked, all of us have talked about this before, how like the horror fans are frequently like, I'm not gonna say like marginalized because that maybe that's kind of a loaded term, but like, you know, we're the redheaded stepchildren of movie fandom, you know, where it's like, yeah, like we like trash. Horror can't be good, but I mean, you know, this is 1990. It's coming at the tail end of like, well, really the horror genre kind of dying. Like horror is dying at this point before Scream comes out and resuscitates it, because the early 90s, which I would even classify this as late 80s, because, you know, February of 90, meh. But I think that's also, yeah, it's just the common perception of people that like horror is that, oh, they're so silly. They don't think about these movies. They just want to go see blood and gore.
Which is funny though that they then said also don't put blood and gore in our horror movie because we want to sell it. To whom then?
Yeah. So this film comes out on February 16th of 1990. It gets released in about 1,400 theaters, grossing $3.7 million on its opening weekend. I think the number one movie that weekend was Driving Miss Daisy, which was 2 months in release, but riding off of like its Oscar wins. Which, can you imagine? Do we want to see Driving Miss Daisy or do we want to go see Nightbreed?
Double bill, double bill, double bill.
It went on to gross $8.8 million in the US and Canada and $7 million internationally for a worldwide total of $16 million on an $11 million budget. So
Great.
If people wonder why we don't have any sequel or, anything else with this movie, that is why. But luckily, we have a couple different versions, as we've already heavily discussed. So we watched the director's cut. There is the theatrical cut, and then there is this fabled Cabal cut, which is kind of like, let's put all the footage there and make it a movie. So in 2009, Mark Miller, co-head of Barker's production company, Seraphim Films, helped track down the missing footage that was cut out of the director's cut of Nightbreed. Miller discovered, after talking to a production executive at the studio, that the footage was never actually lost, which is what some studio heads had told them, but readily accessible. When asked, studio executive said that there was not a big enough audience to warrant the studio spending money on a new extended cut of the film. Barker had found an unmarked VHS copy in his closet somewhere of the 145-minute version of the film's mid-1989 work print.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't feature any of the reshoots of Decker's murders, so they had another extended 159-minute cut version of the film from another VHS they found. That version actually premiered in 2010 as part of the Horror Hound weekend in Indianapolis, and that pretty much includes about an hour of footage cut from the theatrical release, including a song sung by Laurie, more animation, all this shit. So this kind of starts fan rumblings on the internet of, can we get this cut? In early 2012, Russell Charrington, a senior lecturer in film and video production at the University of Derby, created a composite cut of the film using footage found on both VHS tapes and a DVD then recently released by the Warner Archive Collection. This version is the most complete version of Barker's film available and has been dubbed the Cabal Cut. But there's a reason it's not called the director's cut, is because I think it's, Leigh, have you seen this Cabal Cut?
I haven't seen the Cabal Cut, but my understanding is that it wasn't really made with Barker's direction. Like it was just sort of put together by people associated with him or people who wanted to see a complete version.
I mean, it's like, here's all the footage we shot edited together in one movie. Like, that's kind of what it is.
It's the original Snyder Cut.
Oh my God, can you imagine?
I'm not going down that rabbit hole.
This cut is 155 minutes long. It was shown at that year's Mad Monster Party in North Carolina. And I debated even bringing that up, but it was because of this screening that led to a renewal of interest among fans, especially on the internet, which again, I love. It's like, especially on the internet, like, yeah, of course, where else is it going to go? A new petition was created and social networks were used to raise awareness for the extended cut and to encourage producers to release it. This would be colloquially known as Occupy Midian, which I think if it had been about 5 years later, it would have been hashtag Occupy Midian.
Right.
A term coined by actress Ann Bobby, who plays Laurie in the film. A Blu-ray release of the Cabal Cut was put out in September of 2017, which utilized then restored footage from the director's cut, blah, blah, blah. It was limited release, and I think it's like really expensive now. You can put it on eBay for like several $100s, but whatever. Honestly, it wasn't until, but like before that, Shout Factory released the director's cut on Blu-ray in 2014, and so now that we're about to go into the plot, just kind of, I'm not going to go into all the differences, but basically, the director's cut is 20 minutes longer than the theatrical cut, but it includes 40-ish minutes of footage not included. So they actually removed some stuff from the theatrical cut and added more footage that wasn't already in there. So it's a completely different film. And I don't know if it reads completely differently, but it certainly plays completely differently than the theatrical cut.
Mm-hmm. It definitely, it feels more like a messy auteurist vision instead of a hack job is basically the main difference.
And that's kind of how I walk into it. I mean, admittedly, like, I reread our article from a couple years ago, and I was kind of like, ooh, I come across kind of, because I like the film. It's like a 3 out of 5 for me. But reading our article, I was kind of like, oh, my tone is kind of like catty talking
You're
about
a little
this movie.
dickish, yeah.
I'm a little dickish talking about this movie. And so it kind of hurt me to like read my writing, which I never like to do anyway. But like revisiting it now, I'm just kind of like, oh, like, I think maybe I was more upset that I had to watch it twice. So, which is not professional of me at all to even say, but no, watching it now, I mean, with 2 years of like difference on me, I appreciated more of what this film was trying to do.
Mm.
Okay, well, why don't we go into it and we can unpack everything that's going on here. Okay, so we open with credits, and then we've got some frantic POV shots as someone or something is being pursued by creatures that are running towards a locked gate. And this is quickly revealed to be a nightmare by Aaron Boone, who's played by Craig Schaefer. And he's being woken up by his girlfriend, Lori, who is played by Anne Boddy. And she proposes 2 things. She suggests that they go on a getaway somewhere just to like kind of take his mind off of it, but also that he should reconnect with his doctor, whom he hasn't seen for quite some time. So that doctor, coincidentally, calls him that evening. So Dr. Decker is played by David Cronenberg, Canadian, yes.
I mean, it was filmed in Canada. There's Canada. It's Canada and Britain all over this thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Power to the Commonwealth, once again. Mm-hmm. So they have not spoken in about 4 months, and they decide to set up a meeting for the following day. And I think right away there's an interesting power dynamic here. Like the relationship is very weird. It seems like Dr. Decker calls him at night.
There's sexual undertones to that conversation that they have on the phone. Like it's very much like, I need to see you again. Like it's been too long. We need to reconnect. Like it's just this very like, it's this very subdued sort of like almost jilted lover sort of dynamic that Decker sets up with him, which is interesting once we start like diving into like what their doctor-patient relationship actually is.
Yeah, I get a strangely paternalistic relationship piece as well, because Decker says, "Don't disappoint me," before he like logs off the call. And I just thought, oh, that's something that a parent would say to a child that they're frustrated with. But you're not wrong that there's something like David Cronenberg, I find, is giving a very lecherous performance. It's menacing and weird. And I know some people read him very I know that some people read him as very flat. Like I actually had somebody reach out when I said I was watching it, and they said, oh, he seems miscast because he's just like there. He's not really delivering anything other than coldness. And I actually really disagree with that. I think that he's giving a very carefully calibrated performance as someone who's a bit inscrutable.
Well, he says at one point in the film that we all hide behind our masks, and that's very much what this performance is. Like he's very deliberately controlled as an individual, and he's not showing people who he really is, which is Buttonface.
Right. Which I will say, I have never heard of the term Buttonface.
No, I haven't.
I did a bunch of research, so I'm loving that. Loving it.
It's not in the film, obviously. I believe it is a fan term. I don't believe it originates from Barker. I could be wrong about that, but
I think Ghostface is a fan term, right? Because they never say Ghostface in any of them until maybe the 3rd Scream.
Well, and so is Pinhead.
Oh yeah, exactly. Which by the way gets a name drop in this movie.
I mean, hey, if you can't reference your own movies.
But I do, because I think that the audience is questioning motives. I guess it was Decker's motive. Out like he just kills people because it comes up later where he's like, yeah, I'm gonna start pinning things on Boone to like make this happen. But I guess it's people were maybe like, why? Whereas if that's the case, I'm just kind of like, well, he's evil. But also it's like, I don't know, why do people hate queer people so much outside of like, you know, whatever religious beliefs? Like there's no fucking reason. They don't do anything.
Well,
so your frustration
it works better on an allegorical level than a logical level.
Yeah.
And they do get into it with the tying up the gas station worker scene a little bit, and it's not like the best explanation in the world, but it works. It's tonally cohesive at the very least.
But it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, I know your frustration. Why does this guy kill people? Yeah, I don't know. Why do people hate us? I don't know.
Well, or why do people kill? It's like, can he not just be a psychopath? Like he talks about wanting to kill families, and I get that might be one of those inserted pieces that they did to clarify, but it's like, do we need to know why people kill? He could just be a psycho.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess I'll get into this now. He's kind of the way I see Decker is that he's kind of this reflection of how queer identity is pathologized, and how like he's a psychiatrist, and so by othering queer folks, you're able to create this sort of like by making them something distinct medically, you make them something that's treatable, you make them something that's curable, and that's very much what Decker is. But he's also kind of this reflection of like I don't know that this was so much a thing in the early 90s, so maybe this is me putting modern politics onto a film from the past, but it's kind of this thing where like American conservatives will decry something while they themselves are indulging in it. Like particularly like we see instances all the time of like Republican politicians moving against homosexuality, and then they themselves
get caught in
often
stalls in
hiring
public bathrooms.
Yeah, they're hiring male prostitutes. They're meeting up for sex, like that sort of thing. And it's like their actions, their private actions aren't what's wrong. It's their hypocrisy that's wrong. And it's I kind of see Decker as this sort of like reflection of, I'm going to pin all of what's wrong about me onto this community, or specifically onto Boone, because he's someone that's vulnerable and manipulable, and then I'm going to blame them for everything that I am doing.
Yeah. And also I hate them because they reveal things that I don't like about myself.
Exactly.
Well, and I mean, there is, I mean, the one line, I mean, this isn't really Decker related, but there's this one line that Rachel has, you know, where she's like, to be able to fly, to be smoke or a wolf, to know the night and live in it forever. That's not so bad. You call us monsters, but when you dream of flying and changing and living without death. You envy us, and what you envy, and Lori finishes her line, we destroy.
Yeah.
And I always found that really interesting too, because I just kind of linked that like, oh, like queer people live this kind of like particular life, and people like envy, I guess, how, I don't know, unabashedly free and proud we can be sometimes.
Yeah. It's these kinds of things where they're not really subtext. Like it's kind of right there on the surface, to the extent that I'm surprised people would then feel threatened by a reading of this sort, right? Because the text lends itself so clearly to these kinds of readings. Okay, so they make an appointment for the very next day. So before we get to that, though, we do get a suburban household where a woman is slashed in the throat by a man wearing a burlap sack with buttons for eyes and a zipper for a mouth.
this does feel, I mean, I honestly, I was like, did I put on Halloween 2? Like, it feels like it's from a completely different, I like this scene, I think it's really good, but I'm just like, it aesthetically, it feels very out of place in the film. Like, it doesn't look like the same film.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think to the point that it's almost detrimental to what the film is trying to do. I think it's important that we establish that there is this killer in the film, but it comes so early that I think it also makes you anticipate that this is the movie that we're going to get, as opposed to the movie that we actually are going to get. Because I know a lot of people who say, and you know, the first time I watched this, I felt the same way. I thought, oh, this is great. This movie is off to a flying start. I can't wait to get more of this kind of stuff. And then you inevitably feel let down. Yeah, because you're not getting enough of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is like, again, it's an audience expectation versus what the film is actually delivering. But I think these scenes, they feel like they inject excitement in, but also they raise your expectations of what you're not going to get.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and again, I think the intent might be to kind of criticize the slasher archetype in juxtaposition to like these monsters that are set up as the heroes of this story, whereas like it's a very human sort of monstrosity as opposed to just a physical or cultural difference, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That the Nightbreed embodies. So I think there's very purposeful juxtaposition, but I think if you were going to do that, like I think where they kind of fall short is the fact that it really does kind of feel like it belongs in a cool slasher film where it's not necessarily like meant to come off as super cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to speculate too much on how this could have been done better, but I think it's almost like maybe we hear that there's murders going on, and like eventually, like we end at a murder scene, which is the reveal. Which, I mean, again, the film reveals that it's Decker. I think around the 50-minute mark is what I clocked, but like, which is a subversion. It's like, okay, cool, like here we go, here's your killer. But yeah, I get why it's here. I agree, Joe. It's very much like, oh, like this is the movie we're getting. Oops, no, it's not.
Yeah. And I think because we also, in the very next scene, like we get this meeting between Boone and Decker says, well, I've got audio footage of you admitting to these murders under, you know, hypnosis or during treatment and stuff. And I think we probably could have left it just at that to know, yes, there were murders happening. Here's a bunch of photos. Not sure why this psychotherapist happens to have crime scene photos just at his availability.
He has a weird relationship with the police that I'm not really sure how it works.
He seems to actually be the secret police chief.
Mm-hmm.
He feels like a precursor to CSI and all these crime shows that we have nowadays, where it's like, oh, I'm a therapist who can like work with people's minds, but then I get hauled in by the police to like solve crimes with them on a weekly basis. And you think, wow, 1990, we weren't doing this in this way, were we?
Yeah.
Okay. So also important to note in this meeting, Decker gives Boone pills that he can use to treat his condition, and he is told that these are lithium. So
they're not.
Spoiler alert. No. So Boone goes home, he takes a pill, and he then hallucinates a sexual encounter with Lori. And then he goes to find her at the club where she is singing, I Put Johnny Get Angry. I don't actually know if that's the name of the song.
It is the name of the song because I looked it up and immediately bought it because I really like the song, but it's like from the 60s.
Okay. Trace, this isn't going to mean too much to you. Leigh, I'm hoping it'll mean something to you, but this scene feels strangely like a scene that could have come out of Twin Peaks.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's very, I mean, it's contemporary to that. Or
yeah, I was gonna say it's before.
Yeah, because I guess because Twin Peaks came later in 1990, if I remember.
I think
right?
so.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's just a weird.
It's a parallel for sure.
But I think this is distinct to the director's cut. Like I don't think this scene was either not in the theatrical cut or it was like just shortened a lot because we have an entire performance of this song, which I'm sitting here like, yeah, give me this. I'm into it. But I can see someone be
narrative function. It's like Boone doesn't even need to go there. He could just be found wandering on the street, getting run over by large trucks and ending up in the hospital, which is what happens next.
I mean, I will say that like him tripping out in his home with the fire, like did he actually light shit on fire, or is that part of the hallucination?
No idea.
Like that whole scene is like
Well,
bonkers, because like it doesn't really tell you anything. It just tells you that he's tripping balls.
no, and like the sex scene. I mean, is this also when he? No, sorry, it's later when he licks her neck. But Danny, we haven't mentioned it, but Danny Elfman's the composer for this, and I wrote in my notes the music during this hallucination scene is very goofy. It's very Danny Elfman-y, like the most Danny Elfman that this score is. But it's just like, I feel like the tone of this music isn't matching what I'm seeing on screen, or it's supposed to be kind of funny, and I'm not picking up on it.
Well, I do have to wonder like how much score was available to them as they were cobbling together the director's cut. Like if they didn't have like something that fit that was unique for that scene, like maybe they just used what they had. But
right.
I don't know. That's all speculation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the wild thing about this director's cut, is that like even though it's probably the most complete version of Barker's vision we're going to get, it's still not going to be the vision, because it was compromised from the get-go.
Right.
Yeah. And I do think that these early scenes kind of bear the brunt of some of that, where it's like, are these scenes important? Do they mesh together? Like they're all very visually interesting. Like I'm not bored, but I'm also finding it difficult to get a read on exactly what I'm supposed to be doing and feeling.
Totally
Once we hit
random
Act
too.
2, it congeals.
Yeah, totally random too, though. But someone commented on an article too that was like, I think articles like this are the reason why Clive Barker stopped making movies. And I'm thinking to myself, no, his experience making this movie and Lord of Illusions are why Clive Barker stopped making movies.
Yeah, because he was like, oh, people don't appreciate my art in the way, so I'm going to go back to writing books, which I have better control over.
But no, it was all of our faults for analyzing this film with a queer lens.
Well, it sounds like another attempt to pathologize queer people and say, oh, okay, well, I blame you for my problems.
Yep.
Well, and as we all know, artists hate it when you engage with their art.
Ah, worst.
Okay, so Boone ends up in the hospital, and this is where he learns that he has been poisoned by Decker, and he has actually been given hallucinogens, and this is also where he meets Narcisse, who is played by Hugh Ross, and this is it initially seems like a crazed patient at the hospital. He has thumb blades, and he is talking about Midian, which is the fictitious place that Boone sometimes goes in his dreams. But this is confirmation to Boone that this place does exist. So he gets directions, and then Narcisse cuts off his own face. And that's when Boone says, I'm gonna jet. So he leaves as Decker shows up, and the police appear as well.
Yeah, Narcisse is interesting just because like he's very different in this scene as opposed to how he is in the rest of the movie. And like part of that is because like the implication is that he died and became reborn as a Nightbreed.
Right.
But like he's very like sort of neurotic and like believing that Boone is like an angel from Nightbreed who's been sent to guide him and test him and like all that. And it's just interesting that like it fits again into that idea that queer folks are pathologized in that like this guy pretty much seems like he has become crazy because people continually told him he was crazy for thinking this stuff, and now he's just desperate for validation. So I think that's an interesting characterization. And then, you know, once he is able to get to Midian, he's just allowed to wave his freak flag, and he seems a lot happier and more content with who he is as a person. So
well, and with regards to Midian, I think it's interesting because Midian actually is a biblical locale. I mean, it's the land in which Moses lived for 40 years in self-imposed exile. It was in Midian that God appeared to Moses as the burning bush, telling him to go back to Egypt and free the Israelites. And you know, while that's okay, cool. Like, yeah, we're using this like biblical thing to like put in here, but that it's also a queer text. I find it interesting that we incorporate this really iconic biblical locale as the safe haven for us queer folks.
Yeah, and Barker himself is not. He doesn't feel a connection to religion. Like he doesn't consider himself a Catholic or a Christian or any kind of denomination, and yet this is very clearly a kind of savior chosen one story where Boone is meant to become Cabal so that he can, I think they even say at the end, Baphomet says, you know, you were divine to like lead our people to a new home. And you're like, holy shit, that is oh
Heavy.
you were going there with this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So speaking of going there, that is where Boone goes. He drives north. He drives north to Sheer Neck, and then he discovers the gate from his dream. So Midian is actually real. It is located underneath a cemetery that has seemingly been abandoned. He takes a nap. I guess it's been a long day. He hasn't been sleeping well. But he's woken in the dark by Kinski, who is played by Nicholas Vince, and Peliquin, who is Oliver Parker.
So Kinski I called Big Forehead Guy. Peliquin
Yes.
I called Red Ivan Ooze.
Yeah. Kinski, I think of him as like Mac Tonight from like the McDonald's
Yes.
commercials.
Yeah.
He's got like that moon face.
Yes.
He, to me, seems like one of the other characters where you're like, oh, we're going to turn him into a Happy Meal toy for sure. Because like the kids are going to love this design. He's got a funny head.
So this dialogue exchange, because Peliquin is very much like, we cannot let this guy in here. He's a natural.
Yeah.
And I know it's like not the best thing to talk about maybe the bad things the queer community does, but this honestly made me think about how sometimes we as a community have a habit of like excluding
Prove your
people.
gayness to me. You're not gay enough to get in here.
Prove your gayness. It's also trauma comparison. Like that's where, again, like a lot of biphobia comes from, where it's like, oh, like because you can be in a straight passing relationship, like you don't deserve to be in this community because you haven't had the same shame trauma as we have, which it's like, okay, yeah, let's just go assume trauma from people. But that's like, again, him doing that where I'm like, okay, I know that these are our queer stand-ins right here, but him being like, he's a natural, we can't let him in here. It's like, okay, but like, that's not the best way to go about it.
Like just this idea that like you're not allowed to have any sort of queer experimentation or self-discovery, right? Like he has that whole monologue, God is an astronaut, Oz is over the rainbow, Midian is the place where monsters go. And like it's this sort of like self-important sort of descriptor of what Midian is, like, oh man, shit's more real than you ever thought, bro. But like it's kind of this condescension to it, you know, there's you're not allowed to figure these things out and figure out if you belong here. And I think part of that too is though just because like the Nightbreed are in exile and for their own self-protection. I think there's a sort of desire on their community to be careful about who they let in because they don't know what damage that could cause to them. And I'm not saying that's right, especially when you talk about a queer analog, but especially like this movie's coming out like in the early 90s, late 80s, like especially on the tail end of the AIDS crisis. Like
don't
there's
let the killer into the community.
No, I know what you're saying. I get it. Yeah, it's not necessarily right, but it's also like these people have learned to be protective for a reason. And you know, again, in 2021, we can look at it differently and be like, oh no, like, be more inclusive, blah blah blah, whatever the fuck. But no, absolutely, like putting it in the context of like the tail end of the AIDS crisis. Yes, these people have been like, it's bad for everyone involved. So yes, they're going to be a bit like exclusionary is maybe not the right word, but just protective, 100%.
I think it's also important to me that we have two characters here. It's not that he only meets Peliquin and Peliquin is a fucking asshole who says, get out of here, you're not one of us. Like, I think that's why Kinski is also there to show like there are different facets of this group. They do not speak as a monolith, right? Because that's the big thing I took away from this rewatch is I originally thought the Nightbreed were a single community of different looking creatures, and the reality is that they're actually all different species who have formed their own community. And I was like, oh fuck, that is so much more powerful and so much better as a queer analog, because it's not about like, oh, these are just gays. It's like, no, these are gays and lesbians and non-binaries and trans and like all different facets of our community like mixing together, and they don't speak as one. They do have differences of opinions, but they also have to kind of like live around certain standards so that they don't get fucking murdered.
And actually, so Leigh, this is something, because I read your article before doing this, and I mean, I read it before, but like I wanted to like refresh my memory. But one comparison that you made that I really, really, really liked was how the underground of Midian, the atmosphere is very much like a club atmosphere, which mirrors how us as queer people have like made clubs like this like public gathering place of safety.
Yep.
Oh, that is beautiful.
Yeah, that was definitely the vibe I got from it. It's also very similar to some parties I've attended to, where it's just, you know, it's a free for all and everyone's having a good time. And maybe that good time is a little strange to you individually, but you know what? We're not hurting each other. It's cool.
If you're not finding what you're looking for in one room, proceed to the next room, and you may find people who are more your speed. There's a guy dripping his blood into a bowl full of eels, and just it's great. He's having a good time. He's having a ball.
It reminds me of those European sex clubs though too, where like you walk through and there's just like these different. I'm thinking of a Euro trip for some reason, but like, you walk through, there's just different cells of like just people doing their own like kink and fetish and whatever. Cool,
Sure.
Do it.
Do it. Yeah, find you the guy that has the appendages coming out of his stomach.
It's so
Don't
gross.
kink shame me, Trace.
No, you by all means use your stomach tentacles. They're all good. I just not for me.
Okay. So so Peliquid is basically considering whether or not he wants to eat Boone. So he decides to take a bite out of him, which in hindsight works well for Boone, because if not, Boone would have immediately been murdered because Decker is waiting for him with the police, which includes Detective Joyce, who we have not talked about, played by Hugh Kershey. And Boone basically just gets shot like 30 times just outside the gates of the cemetery, and this is the 30-minute mark and our protagonist is dead.
But
and not just shot, like fucking framed by Decker. Like he goes up on the pretense of like helping him and then screams he has a gun in order to get him killed.
That moment, you're just like, oh fuck.
But even still though, it's like Peliquin though, like, don't you think you should know that your bite's gonna make him a Nightbreed? Like whatever it is.
Well, I think they say later in the film that he didn't believe the prophecy.
Right. And see, I think this prophecy is something that was cut from the theatrical version. I don't think any of these murals or anything were in there. So it doesn't make any. I can see how you're watching this in theaters being like, this doesn't make any sense.
I always just read it as, Peliquin hoped to eat him and Boone just happened to get away.
Get to finish.
Yeah. Don't you hate it when your meal runs away on you? Okay, so Boone is dead. We're back in the real world. Laurie is called in to identify the body. She's questioned, and this is when Boone just kind of wakes up and scampers away a little bit. So I debated whether or not to include this because it's kind of immaterial, but I do love the image of Decker sitting in some kind of throne room with just a table full of knives, and like it's so weirdly cyberpunk, and it gives me slight Asian vibes, and it's just a really weird scene. But he's like, oh, okay, I'm going to replay these tapes and learn a little bit more about Midian.
Yeah, it kind of feels like it's like his personal sanctum that he's sitting in. Like I have no idea where he is during that scene, but like he's just sort of like on his own. This is where he can be himself without having to put on the mask to go out in public.
Yeah. The real him involves 20 knives on a boardroom table. Okay, so this is where we start to switch over to Laurie's side of the film. So she takes over as protagonist and she decides to follow Boone's path. So she drives north. She ends up stopping at the Buffalo Days Rodeo Bar, where she meets Cheryl Ann, played by Deborah Weston, who is just so unceremoniously killed in this movie that it hurts me because I love Cheryl Ann.
This doesn't need to be in this movie. It does not need to be in this movie. But I love this character so much, that I would never remove her. Like, she's also so unabashedly sexual. She's a female character who wants sex, who is hunting for sex in this bar. And it's like, it's great. Like, I love it so much.
As someone who was hunted for sex in Calgary bars, I can sympathize. Yeah. I grew up in Calgary, so this movie has like a weird extra bonus to me where I'm like, oh, hey, hometown, okay.
Wait,
Oh,
Billy,
that's
what were
funny.
you saying?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like she's so great, and like she is there to kind of like reintroduce Decker to Laurie a little bit, like just so that like she kind of understands who she is. But like Cheryl is so unceremoniously killed. You're right, and I'm like, I see her killed, and I just think, Decker, that's how you get ants. Like,
Oh my god, now you're making me think about Jessica Walter.
oh, I'm sorry.
But yeah, no, she's great. I mean, she's not as good as this woman we're gonna get later who's obsessed with her cream-filled donut or whatever, but like
there are so
We'll get
many
to her,
weird
but, oh my
little
God.
character choices in this movie. And that's when you think, okay, so this film is bloated, it is excessive, it's got too much going on, but also, do we want to cut those weird
No,
moments?
we do not.
No.
Okay, so let's hop back to Midian. This is where Boone is reunited with Narcisse, and he is introduced to Lylesburg, who is played by Doug Bradley.
Unrecognizable.
I think you wouldn't even know.
No. I when I was making a cheat sheet for this episode, I was like, oh, Doug Bradley was in this? Who's Lylesburg? And then when we get to him, I was like, oh yeah, I would never have guessed that at all.
Well, and interestingly enough, apparently in the theatrical cut, he was dubbed.
Yep.
So you wouldn't even have known it was him anyway.
Because he was supposed to have, I want to say, a German accent, and I guess the one he recorded, they wanted someone more German sounding.
Right. Okay. All this to say, Boone eventually passes this test, and he is welcomed into the Nightbreed so long as he adheres by their rules. So we cut back to the bar and the hotel and all that kind of stuff. It's the next morning. Cheryl Ann is filling in Laurie all about this man named Curtis that she met, and she's just having such a good time. She's so
I'm sorry. Like a really, really quick, a little touch. It's not important, but a touch that I like is during the ritual. I do love Narcisse like lighting a match on the wall, and there's that cut of everyone just going, sorry. It's like a little bit of comic. There are some funny moments in this movie. Again, Cheryl Ann is like pure comic relief. But like, yeah, that moment, like you don't need that moment in this scene. But like, it works. Like I get the vibe here. It's kind of kooky and weird.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's telling that Narcisse, as you mentioned, Lee, it seems like a completely different character, but it's because he's more himself, and also he's at home among people where he can act the fool and light matches during ceremonies when he should be shutting the fuck up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he has one of the more fun performances in the movie. I think he's just having a ball, like, and just towing the line between like being an oddball goofster and also like maybe a violent maniac, but like he's got enough restraint. Just enough.
And audiences thought the same thing, which is why his death was removed from the theatrical cut. It is only in the director's cut that he is killed.
So would they have then tried to bring him back in subsequent films, do you suppose?
Probably so. I mean, again, if your test audience is saying, don't kill this character, we like him, right. Yes, I imagine they would have done that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, so Cheryl Ann and Laurie head north. They go back to the cemetery in Midian, and as Laurie is investigating, it's revealed that Curtis is actually Decker, and this is like the full confirmation. If you didn't realize, oh, Decker is like a super bad dude, he is also this serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we don't get that quite yet because we have to follow Laurie. So she discovers some kind of creature. I definitely wrote lycanthrope in my notes the first time I saw this because it looks like a baby werewolf.
It looks like a Jim Henson monstrosity creation.
Yeah. Yep.
So not your favorite then, Trace?
Not my favorite. I mean, it looks good. I am just disgusted. I'm like that producer that's like, this is disgusting. I can't watch the rest of this movie.
It looks like Salacious Crumb covered in tumors.
Like, oh my god!
It's very shiny and juicy, and its eyes are really big. Yeah. But it is kind of cute. But it's also like I don't want to touch it.
I do
And I
think
also
it's
love that its mother is just named Rachel. Like, we have
Yeah.
all these like fancy names for all these Nightbreed, but then there's Rachel.
because we learned that this creature will transform into a little girl with like perfect ringlets when she gets out of the sun. She's named Babette. She's played by twins Kim and Nina Robertson. And then she's got the surrogate mom, Rachel, played by Catherine Chevalier.
This is I like the Rachel character, even though she's like your stereotypical like mom, like she's your protective mother. I actually like, she doles out the most exposition, and she's also the kindest. Like, I am endeared to her from the moment we meet her in this movie.
Well, and her smoke powers are fucking badass.
Yes,
so good and unexpected. Although admittedly, I was like, oh, nudity. Okay, we're gonna do that.
But she doesn't have any nipples, right? I mean, like, she
No,
is
you're
naked.
thinking of Porcupine Girl. Porcupine Girl.
Oh shit! Yes, you're right.
Yeah. Okay, so Laurie has no fear at all. By the way, she picks up this dog thing that turns into a girl. She's not surprised. She follows them down into this dark crypt. Is not overly worried. Even when she's warned by Peliquin that like she needs to get the fuck out of there, she still kind of hesitates, and then she eventually runs away.
I'll say she's weirded out. She's definitely weirded out by what's going on, but I think she's more worried about Boone than she is afraid.
But okay, so if we're gonna keep this like queer club allegory, right? It's like your straight person wandering into a queer bar where it's like, what is going on here?
Right.
Like, I'm kind of frightened, I'm kind of disturbed, but I'm also intrigued. Oh my god, am I queer? I don't know what's going on. Like,
why are my nipples so hard right now?
I mean, again, the fact that she also becomes queer by the end of the film, like, I just, again, like, I mean, she is a better audience surrogate to me than Boone is, because she's like, I don't know, like, it's like she's discovering all this for the first time. So it's like, look, I'm discovering all this shit that is very foreign to me. I am not afraid of it. I am treating it as if it's something that just is. And so maybe that's why I latch onto her more, is because of the way she reacts to all this.
Well, I think it's interesting because like if we accept like Laurie becoming a Nightbreed at the end of the movie as like an understanding that she is now a queer character as well, it's really that Boone and Laurie are kind of two different ways of self-discovery for queerness. Like, whereas like Boone is very much defined by like repression and not understanding things about himself, whereas Laurie is about discovery and about like not knowing that this existed, but also maybe wanting to be part of it.
I like that read, because I do have a big issue with the literalness of her dying by suicide essentially at the end for love, which is something that I felt 2 years ago and I still feel today. But that reading makes me like, it's an easier pill to swallow looking at it that way.
I think this is also where I see a lot of Barker's S&M background coming into play, where it's like somebody who didn't know what they were into until they started to gain exposure and could begin to appreciate it, and discovering, oh, this can also work for me. But I think the queer allegory is stronger, so we'll go with that.
You know, a little column A, a little column B,
a little of everything. Yeah,
little Venn diagram.
So Laurie ends up running out of the crypt. She runs through the cemetery, and that's where she gets back to the car and tragically learns that Cheryl Ann is fucking dead. She has been hung from a tree. Well, yeah, pinned to a tree. It's this is another one of those things where when you're telling me that Barker was told to hold back from the gore, I think that this is a really good creative use of it, right? We get a bloody handprint on the door, and then we get to see a brief-ish glimpse of Cheryl Ann. Like, we know she's dead, we know it's horrible, but it's not over the top and disgusting.
But as horror fans, though, didn't y'all want this like death set piece?
No, because I like Cheryl Ann too much.
I would have gone for like a chase or like some kind of like
I will say it does kind of feel like there are some missed opportunities to watch Decker kill. Like specifically, the one I think of is, we already talked about it, but like late in the film when he fights Narcisse. like we only get to see the aftermath of that, which I don't know if they shot that and just like that footage was never recovered or what, but that feels that feels unfortunate that we don't get to see that showdown.
Yeah,
for a character who again clearly made a connection with audiences, whether he died or not. Like people were like, I like that character, even if I don't know what his name is. I like that character.
It's not enough to just see his decapitated head. I would like to see more.
Face guy.
Okay, so we do get a bit of a chase scene here when Decker chases her through the cemetery, but this is really when we reconfirm that Boone isn't quite fully on board with the rules of the Nightbreed. So he fights with Lyleberg's advice that he is not allowed to interfere with the topside world. And he ends up saying, well, fuck this shit. I'm going to go and protect her. So he does end up scaring Decker away. And then he goes to give chase. And this is when Narcisse, and I get a sexual assault vibe from this, but I think, I don't know how to read this.
It's weird because it feels like he wants to let loose as a monster now, like this is his opportunity to do so, but it's against the wrong person,
right?
And like it does feel kind of weirdly sexually assaulty, but I don't think it crosses the line into that territory with any sort of explicitness.
No,
it just sort of it's coded that way, but it's not coded that way so strongly that I feel icky about it.
Yeah, not like I want to see this character now get punished because I can't fucking stand him. But you're like, nah, like it's to the point where I think, oh, well, you just undid some of the goodwill that I felt for this person.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Boone gets a talking to from Lyleberg for this. He's basically told that he's put Midian at risk for discovery. And at this point, I don't know that we fully understand the gravity of the situation. It kind of just seems like Lyleberg is being a bit of a dick. But it's important then that this is where we get the gas station scene. So this is, again, very, to me, it's like, oh, are we in Friday the 13th territory? Because we've got a weird hermit who lives in a gas station and does taxidermy, and then he like locks doors but still manages to get tied up with Christmas lights and interrogated. And this is where we learn that Decker is not just a family annihilator, but also that he does not believe in families and wants to eradicate them, and therefore wants to eradicate the Nightbreed.
But okay, so this is the thing, right? So I picked up immediately on like the use of the term, because we call them Nightbreed, but he calls them breeders, which I think is very, very, very interesting, because that is what the informal term that a lot of queer people call non-queer people. They are the breeders. And unless you're having sex without condoms, then you're just breeding all the time.
Okay.
Then, but so that is his motive. Like, oh, I want to kill all the families. That also reads to me as someone who is queer, who has a very bad experience and is like wanting to destroy the thing that they didn't have, or like this nuclear unit that they didn't have growing up, which ties into, I think, Joe, is what you brought up, has said that Decker feels like a queer person who's like internalizing a lot of homophobia.
Yeah, it that definitely factors into my read, at least, of Decker as like almost envious of what the Nightbreed have, like, and doesn't he's not like outwardly envious, like he doesn't say like I want what they have, but he definitely feels like a monster in society because he has this desire to kill, but that's not the kind of monster that like is actually exiled for things that don't matter, or like things that like, because like the Nightbreed are victims of genocide, like pure up. And he wants to like he wants to be he thinks that his mode of thinking should be the default. Is kind of the feeling I get from him. It's like, oh, all you breeders are wrong. Like all you people who seek connection and family are wrong. Like I am alone. I am great, and I'm going, and to prove how great I am, I'm going to destroy your family units. Like,
it honestly feels. I mean, I know we were joking about like superhero shit earlier, but it honestly feels like a comic book villain, where it's like a guy. It's a person who is like who should be sympathetic and comes from a bad background. Like again, if we're going with this idea that he is a queer person or a Nightbreed or whatever, but he's revolting against the idea of family because it's something that he's never experienced because his family rejected him, and he hates seeing other queer people happy with a family that they've created, even though it's not a nuclear family, it's their own family that they've made. He can't stand to see that because he never experienced it himself and is lashing out about it.
mm-hmm.
And like this is heavy, nuanced, complicated stuff in what was intended to be a fairly straightforward blockbuster film, like that the studio wanted to sell, right? So you can only imagine that they were looking at this and saying, but it's not clear. I don't understand what's he doing. And this is where I think the film resonates so much more strongly with queer audiences, because we're picking up on that. Like, we understand that Decker isn't just a simple villain who's like, oh, I'm just going to kill a bunch of people because of X, Y, and Z, right? Like, he's so much more interesting and multifaceted than that.
Right.
But that doesn't sell well when you're trying to just package and commodify a big property to the masses.
In 1990, I mean, well, yeah, in 1990, like,
yeah, like it's around this point where I start to realize, oh, this film never had a chance of being the blockbuster or even probably the medium-sized hit that they were hoping for, because there's just too much fucking weirdness going on in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so that gas station guy's dead. That was the takeaway from all of that. Okay, so Laurie has woken up. She is in catacombs. We've got this great production design of like this wall of skulls.
Yep.
I don't understand if it's meant to be reflective of all the Nightbreed or if it's just like we're goth kids and we like skulls, so this is our aesthetic.
I think it kind of because this is where we get the backstory about the Nightbreed genocide. So I think it is very much symbolic of like, oh, our civilization is built on the bodies of our forebears, that sort of thing.
And I mean, the basic gist of the genocide is just like, yeah, so the Nightbreed were a peaceful folk that lived, and humans came and just wiped them out. Like that. That's the basic gist of it. That
and the fact that they were from different tribes, right? So,
like the Nightbreed were various races of. I was gonna say otherkin, but I think furries would take issue with that. But like just various non-human races,
right?
That banded together.
Exactly. So what do you think of these torture tableaus that Babette kind of puts into Laurie's head?
I think they're very, like, I like them. I like them stylistically. They're kind of, they do feel like they maybe belong more in a Hellraiser, with the gore turned up a little bit, but
that's the S&M aspect. I mean, like, I think it's just like it's that being incorporated here without much explanation, which is fine for me.
This is where I start to get like, oh, okay, we are also telling a religious text, because this has kind of like the Crusades vibe to me.
Anyway. Yeah, like we're not quite getting to the Moses saviory stuff yet, but I definitely see where we're laying the groundwork for that.
Yeah. Okay. So this is where we get the tour of Midian as Laurie goes looking for Boone, and we get just this broad, sweeping overview of not just what the space is kind of comprised of, but also the various kinds of
again,
creatures.
it's done like a European sex club. Like I mentioned Eurotrip earlier, but it's also like very hostel-y. Like it's very much like we're walking through this tunnel of like different rooms with viewing windows to see all the pleasures and pains happening.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
such sights to show you.
right. I mean, I did end up looking at it a bit more as like a house with many, many, many different types of rooms, and each person is allowed their individual space with which they get to do whatever they want.
So, okay, did y'all pick up on this though? There is a line. I think it's the stomach tunnel tube guy who comes out and goes, "There goes the neighborhood." And is that not something that as queer people you're like, "Oh, I know that." I mean, it's also racial. I mean, like that's very much something that like white neighborhoods would say when a black family would move in. But it's also like, "Oh yeah, like you have two gay men moving into the house next door in the suburban neighborhood. There goes the neighborhood." And so I love that it's reversed, where it's the queer people, "Oh, a straight person's here."
Yeah, and it works with the bar analogy as well, right? I'm thinking of like when hen parties show up in the gay bar and you're just like, fuck, this is our space. Can you please not?
Right.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so the other big takeaway, well, little-ish takeaway here, it's a bit of foreshadowing, is when fucking Peliquin shows back up and he promises that Laurie will eventually want to live forever. So that's laying the groundwork for her ultimate decision at the end of the film.
Which doesn't happen in the theatrical cut. So it's just like, what?
Oh, okay, thanks. Credits.
Yep.
Okay, so back in Sheerneck, we've got Detective Joyce and Decker meeting with a new character, because we're still introducing characters at this point. This is where our introduction to Captain Agerman, who is played by Charles Hayde, and they immediately start butting heads over jurisdiction, which just kind of proves to us that Agerman is a big asshole. Yeah. So we're still with Laurie. She is descending kind of deeper and deeper into Midian, which it was an interesting kind of analogy because it made me think of like Dante's like different levels of hell, where she's just constantly kind of like uncovering new horrors because we see the berserkers at this point. This is actually where she does get an apology from Narcisse, who says he didn't mean to attack her earlier. And we also get a little bit with a character we haven't met before, but I haven't talked about him, Onaka, who is played by Simon Bamford. He's the
He's the guy with the little dog, right?
He's the guy with the dog and the toga and the tattoos.
Okay, I didn't know this character's name, but I love this character. He's so sweet.
He's super cute, but also just weird. Like he's a bit like
he's got a service animal.
Okay. Yes. He reminded me of like a fairy or a sprite where it's like they'll stir up some shit and lead you into trouble, but ultimately they're harmless and they don't mean you well, or they don't mean you any harm.
But isn't it telling that outside of Narcisse though, he gets the most like showy, painful death out of all of the Nightbreed?
Yes.
His death is like harsh.
It very much is. Like I forgot that he died, and oof.
Yeah.
I mean, like his death is like one of the biggest examples of like let's just call it what it is. It's police brutality against queer folks.
Yes.
And like they rip out his nipple ring and shove him to the ground and allow him to burn alive.
Yeah.
In like a very like just very gruesome way that's like they clearly don't care about his well-being. They're just going to let him die.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we've jumped ahead, but since we're talking about it, the thing that struck out to me this time is we actually see, sorry, I forgot his name. We see Onaka actually reach out to Detective Joyce, and Joyce recoils and refuses to help him.
It's a prolonged death. It's not gory because again, he just burns. I mean, just burns alive. Air quotes for people listening, right? But it's so brutal. It's so uncomfortable, and like yes, that recoiling of Eigerman is just like.
It's not Eigerman, sorry, it's Joyce, and it's.
I'm sorry, Joyce.
It's just
Yeah.
It's a key
But
piece
Joyce
because
is the one that you
it's the
think
only...
is kind of the cop on the up and up, but that scene shows you that like no, he's like
he has a moment. He has a I don't know if it's this. He has a I think it's this death scene where it's like you see him thinking like, do I want to help this person?
And he decides.
But he decides no.
Yes, he decides no.
But I think it's important that he's like the only identifiable person of color in this movie as well. So it's like one marginalized group reaching out to another one and not being met with kindness, being met with, I think that moment of contemplation is important, but ultimately it's no, I can't help you. I refuse to.
Which, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, like, this is me putting like now on 1990, but it's also very much like, yeah, I mean, like, there's a lot of queer people who don't want to stand up for other queer people because they don't want to face backlash from other people. And I don't think that this particular scene is like making any statement on race. I think like we're doing this now because of the time period we're in.
Yeah.
But it's very much like, yeah, I'm sure like if as a minority figure, you may not want to stand up for another minority figure who's in the spotlight getting abused in some way because you don't want to endure the same type of experience. So I understand it. It's hard to watch, but again, that's something that me as a gay man, I'm watching this like, oh, like I'm not excusing his behavior at all, and it's terrible, and I still think he's a villain in this movie. But I'm also just like, yeah, I mean, I kind of get it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Complicated.
Nuance.
Okay, so where we're at is that Laurie eventually finds Boone. He's been sent to Baphomet to, I guess, commune with him gently or something. It's like it's meant to be a punishment because nobody ever comes back. But of course, Laurie finds Boone and they just leave. So, hint, hint, he's the savior. So they head back to the Sweetgrass Motel, and I'm glossing over it, so feel free to have a more sustained conversation about it. But Decker has already murdered all of the employees and guests.
Okay, this is the donut. This is the donut. Scene.
This, I mean, I can't even describe how ridiculous this scene is.
Why does she pick up the donut piece by piece?
But then she's licking her. I thought she was gonna eat the fucking thing.
Oh, I thought so too.
It's just a fucking floor donut, and she's like picking it up bit by bit, like saving it in a clump, and it's like, oh, maybe I'm gonna eat this later. You don't know. She doesn't get to it again.
But also, what a memorable character! Like, she is fascinating. I want to know her story. I want to go shopping with her.
Have either of y'all? I'm sure the answer is no. But have either of y'all seen the movie Problem Child 2?
Oh God,
I have not. No,
I've heard all about it.
There's a character in it, and she's played by Lorraine Newman, who's an SNL like vet. But her name is LaWanda Dumore, and this woman looks just like Lorraine Newman. And I was like, is this Lorraine Newman coming in for like a 2-minute cameo on this horror movie to eat a fucking donut before she dies?
But the answer is yes, ladies and gentlemen, and we're joined now by Lorraine. No, okay.
But like again, the Barker focuses the camera on this again. She put this piece up here.
It is like 2 minutes long.
Also, her face.
Yeah, a lot of licking of the lips.
She's savoring every bit of that donut.
Yes,
you get.
This must have been the world's most expensive pastry. I don't know what the fuck it was, but it looked really good.
She's bougie. She probably paid back in $1990 like $1.35 for that donut.
Oh my God.
Oh man.
So she's dead. She dies.
So she's dead. I will say, I think probably visually one of the most fascinating shots in this movie is when Laurie and Boone get back to the hotel. She goes into her room. Nothing seems amiss except that there is a hole in her wall, and we get to see her eye go up to the hole, and then we see that it is like a murder set piece that has been staged, fucking Hannibal style, with a deck of cards constructed as a house. A house, ladies and gentlemen, in case you're missing the symbolism, Decker has left them a house of cards with like a bunch of dead bodies all around it.
Oh my God. And his name is Decker. It's his deck of cards.
There we go.
Okay.
We have solved it.
I know we were decrying stretching earlier, but
No,
That's
that
his
was not
calling
allowed.
card.
No, Trace,
He might as
go to
well
your
have
corner.
cards. Button face, it's card face. That was a real Mr. Barker. That was a missed opportunity.
Boo. So what do you folks think of this where Boone is now an uncontrollable fiend and his face changes and he licks blood and he
he
scares
doesn't
Lori?
just lick blood; he deep throats that blood.
Yeah, he does a lot with that blood. I mean, it's fine. It's like he's experimenting with semen.
Oh my god. We made it so close to the end. I thought if we got past the cream donut, we would be okay, but
I'm like 3/4 the way through this bottle of wine, so it's fine.
I'm sorry, you're 3/4 of the way of wife through the white wine. What?
Yeah. No, but I mean, like, sorry, I just thought about that now. It's great. No, but like, it's cool. It's cool. I like him experimenting with the blood. It's a new experience for him. He's learning that he likes blood, like some of us learned that we like.
Okay.
I
like the makeup
blood
job.
trace. Like it's not even an allegory.
No, it just is. It's red semen. That's just what it is.
No. Let's not do that.
That's fine. Go ahead.
You should see your medical professional for that.
I'm glad someone else was here to say it.
It's fine.
So we also have a SWAT team who is descending on this motel at the exact same time. And of course, this is when Boone decides, yes, I am going to experiment with blood/semen. And they come in at a very inopportune time and discover that he is now covered in blood in the bathroom with a bunch of corpses around. So he is taken into the precinct. This is where Captain Agerman proceeds to beat the shit out of him. And we are introduced to yet another new character, ladies and gentlemen. We are introduced to a priest named Ashbury, who is played by Malcolm Smith.
So, I mean, I know we've talked about police brutality against queer people. Boone getting
a lot.
beat, it's a lot. Yes. I mean,
do you think it plays differently in 2021 compared to, would this have just been like, oh, they're roughing him up because he's a criminal suspect in 1990?
No, because
no.
Leigh very much discussed this exact scene in their article.
Remind me what I said, because I wrote that article years
No,
ago.
it was very much like, I mean, this is very much like, if you're a queer person like watching this, like, this is very much like it is police brutality against queer people, and it's hard. Granted, police brutality exists, be it against queer people or not. It's against people in general, but it does exist against queer people, and so it's yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it lands differently when, again, you're a member of a marginalized community, because there's something that much more threatening when you're the other, right? When you're not part of the mainstream society. We often feel like the police are not there to protect us. They are not our friends. They are far more likely to try to pin things on us or find reason to hurt or attack us. So I think this speaks to some of our innate fears where we just don't feel safe with the people who are meant to be protecting us.
Yeah.
Have y'all been actually, I'm sorry, y'all can deny this, but have y'all like been pulled over or been arrested or anything like that? Because I have been pulled. I've never been arrested, but I have been pulled over a handful of times. I get really nervous around cops, because it's just like I'm the goody two shoes. Like, I don't make trouble, so when I'm around cops, I'm just like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. But even as I remember once I got pulled over for speeding, and it was in college, and I was wearing a pride bracelet. It was rainbow, and I literally saw the cop look at the bracelet. And he started acting differently. Not in a way that was like, oh, I'm going to be meaner to this guy. He was like backing off of me because I was wearing a pride bracelet. And it's been like 10 years, but I've always thought it's been like, I wonder if he thinks I'm going to like report him for being gay, for being homophobic, or like for being mean to me because I was gay. Because I can play it in my mind where I just saw him cluck my bracelet. And it was the weirdest experience.
Yeah. I don't have anything like that. Although like I haven't been pulled over since I was in law school actually. And I casually mentioned that I was in law school, and I definitely saw him like, okay, this guy's
Oh.
not a troublemaker. Like I'm just gonna leave this shit alone because let me be frank, a lot of folks who are in law school are like, until we get out into the real world, a lot of us think that we know how to game the system because we know shit,
Right.
and it's like that's not how it works. And like I think this officer was like, this guy's gonna be a bigger pain in the ass for me than it's worth.
Yep. That's it. That's it.
Yep. So that worked out for me, but not everyone gets not everyone has that privilege. So I will own that. I will absolutely own that.
Fair. Okay, so yes, Boone has been victimized by the police in Sheerneck, and at this point, this is where Eggerman, the police chief, does his really badly delivered press conference where every reporter seems to know far, far more about him, and he gets really mad at Decker, who is just kind of hanging around making fun of him. I kind of love it.
Yeah, it's good.
Yep, it's a fun scene.
At the same time, though, Detective Joyce is now leading men into Midian because they know that that's where all of this went down. So this is where we unfortunately get the scene of Onaka getting pulled out into the sun and exploding brutally. And because of this interaction, and because Boone is known to be at the police precinct, this is where we have Narcisse and Rachel leaving Midian to go and rescue Boone. But before they do that, they set a police cruiser on fire, which unfortunately escalates the whole situation. And we get this kind of montage of the police officers basically weaponing up and a mob vigilante group forming so that they can all go and storm Midian.
We don't like what we don't understand, and because it scares us. Da 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 da. It's the mob song every time, every fucking time. It's that fucking mob song.
But
I mean, it still applies.
But this is like a straight up militia. Like this is very much like, I mean, this was the January 6th crowd. Like this.
No, for this tiny little group of monsters underneath a cemetery, like
who aren't doing anything,
doing nothing. I mean, again, that's where this queer aspect comes in again too, where it's like, who are we bothering outside of existing? Outside of existing, and that's the problem, right? You exist, and you deserve to be exterminated. For existing as you are.
I think there's also an interesting commentary here, and this is maybe from somebody who grew up like in the area where this story is set and shot. This is a conservative area. This is an area where it's like people don't own guns in Canada per se, but it's like if you were to go hunting, you would own guns, and if you were rural, like if you didn't live in the big city, you would be far more inclined to have arms and that kind of stuff. But like this very much feels like a less than subtle condemnation of conservatism, but also rural people as being particularly unwelcoming to people who are othered.
Well, Eigerman's line was he says something about commies, freaks, or third world Y chromosome mutants.
Yep.
And it's like, that is a wild line.
It's very specific, right? Ugh.
Like, and again, coming from a British man who has like grown up in like the kink scene, in the queer scene, like this is heavily political.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, agree.
Okay, so thankfully, because all of the police officers and this vigilante mob have gone to Midian, it does leave the police precinct mostly abandoned, except for a couple of officers.
No one's there.
It's like 2 or 3 guys. I mean, how big is the police force in this small town as well?
But again, I also love Rachel just in the back of this car, like, she's like a famed actress in this limousine. Like,
Mhm.
hello, my name is Rachel.
Yeah, I do love that they just pick up Lori and they're like, get in the back. We're driving to the police precinct. We're going to bust out your boyfriend.
Get in, loser. We're going to bust him out.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. So they arrive, and this is where we get the demonstration of Rachel's powers, because we really haven't understood what her deal is. She just seems to be like a lady with exposition, and she looks hot. And then we get to see this fun, like, I think this action sequence is actually quite exciting. The way that the mist comes through the hallway, through the key, and then she appears. And I mean, she says she's not going to hurt this guy, but like, she kills him, right?
Yeah. She's smoke from. I mean, Mortal Kombat comes later, but like she's smoke or Dracula. If you really want to go there.
Yes, go with Dracula. So all this to say, they get to Boone, and he's being whiny and mopey, and they're like, hi, can you come and save the fucking community that you want to be a part of?
So like him and Lori like have this like foreplay scene in the cell when they rescue him.
Yeah.
And like there's this moment where he just licks Lori's neck, and it's like, that's very interesting. I don't know. Like, I mean, I get it. It's a thing that we do when we're having sex. We lick people. I do get that. But it was just like he looks at her neck and just goes. It's just the funniest thing.
Like, did she have blood on her neck and he just wanted
no!
that like, little dab?
Yeah. Just time and place, Boone. Time and place.
That's sweat, lady juices.
Okay.
And I don't think that's what lady juices are.
Not on the neck. Most often.
Go on. Move on.
I mean, yeah. It's one of the 4 other body parts, along with neck, back, pussy, and crack. I'll let you figure out which one.
Okay, well, it's maybe time to acknowledge that we've all been drinking during this podcast because the depth of criticism.
I don't know about y'all, but my ass sweats like heavily. So like it's a thing that happens. So I'm sure the neck and the back also sweat heavily from some people.
Oh boy. I'm just doing this myself now, aren't I? You
no, you're fine.
No, we're good. We're good.
Okay. So they decide that they're going to haul ass back to Midian. They're going to save the day, but it is too late because Captain Eigerman has set off explosives all over the place. And this is basically where we get into the last act carnage. And from here on out, it's just a bunch of explosions and people getting murdered. A lot of people that we don't know getting murdered.
I will confess, I actually had an issue. So this is 30 minutes. We have 30 minutes left of this movie, and it's really just a war. Like, and that makes it sound like I'm I mean, it was mostly I was just kind of like, okay, I get it, movie. Like, I get it. And it's just a really long action sequence, which I feel even bad, like, belittling it like that, because I feel like, again, like, their budget, a lot of it is going towards this big action set piece. I just don't find it as interesting, maybe, as a lot of stuff that came before it.
I think the main issue is that like we're seeing a lot of the what the creatures can do for the first time in this fight.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
And so like it feels like they want to make the most out of their creature designs, the most out of their makeup effects, like the most out of everything that they put all of this budget and effort into.
Yeah.
But it's all crammed into like this like 20-minute stretch.
Yeah.
And like I still think it's fun.
Yeah.
And like I still think it's like paced pretty well with regards to like they do try to they try to insert that priest character in as sort of like this moral objector throughout, and like
which I think he played a bigger part in because again, like this is the man that resurrects Decker in the theatrical cut, and we don't get that in this cut.
Well, and I think he's kind of meant to play, like, I really feel like he's meant to play a bigger role in the sequel.
Oh yeah. The antagonist in the sequel, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because the director's cut does not really have a sequel tease except for this priest.
and he's so integrated into this third act. Like you can't really cut him.
Right. Except it
but,
almost
like,
feels like you should, because
Yeah.
what we do get of him, this is my version of the Decker criticism that other people have. I don't understand why this priest character turns on them. Like he's a foil for Eggerman. Eggerman literally calls him the F word, the gay slur.
Which but again though, this is being written by a gay man.
Oh,
which
yeah. No. It's not a criticism of the film. It's a criticism of Eggerman being a fucking prick. But I do think it's significant that he calls like this religious figure the gay slur. This preacher or this priest is very interested in, like, I want to know more about this religion. I want to be touched by God. But this God is obviously queer. Like, this is the queer messiah that he wants to meet. And then he literally gets covered in the religious waters or juices of this creature, becomes queer himself, because the last we see of the priest is like, I say deformed in my notes, but it's clear that he's just now kind of a member of the Nightbreed, or that he's been soured or something.
Right. Yeah.
I don't like. I think he's fascinating, but I feel like there's been stuff cut out of this character, and his motivations don't make sense to me.
That's fair.
Yeah, he's vestigial, is what I'd say. Like he feels like an outline for something more interesting to come, but is like and like it probably would play differently if the director's cut had actually been released, and there was like a big enough marketing push where you were expecting this to be a franchise. But like with how it's been released now, and like knowing that this is an incomplete vision, it's more of just like an interesting note of authorial intent rather than something that's satisfying narratively.
It's like the shadow of what could have been had this come to fruition. But what we get is instead just like, oh, there was something there, but we're never gonna figure it out. We should also note that Decker is still in play, and he kills Detective Joyce very unceremoniously before most of this gets going.
Yeah, I mean, there's a thing for. I agree, it's unceremonious. I'm just kind of like, oh, that's it, like that's it. But I also get like, I tend to be more forgiving about that kind of stuff during war scenes, because war is that, like, people will just die,
right?
But it's still kind of like, ugh. But like
I think the intent here is that, like, because we do have that moment where Joyce recoils from the Nightbreed, and like we kind of see that he's like not an okay dude. And I think like kind of the intent here is like him realizing like maybe we're the baddies, like that sort of thing, and like he gets his comeuppance for that. But I don't think that I don't know that the scene carries that.
It doesn't lay
like I'm kind of reading that into it.
I think at times we almost have to be a bit more generous, because it's not quite there, but you can see what the intention was.
And you know, again, this is an incomplete, like this is as complete as we're ever going to get it, but this is like
still incomplete.
It's still an incomplete version of Barker's intent. Like like this is a very auteurist movie that didn't get the auteur treatment.
Okay. So we have Boone and Louwsburg disagreeing about how they should be handling this invasion of straight men from the city, more or less. I think it's interesting that Louwsburg basically doesn't want to do anything because he's afraid of putting people at risk. And Boone challenges that by saying, we not only need to abandon this ship, but we also have to learn how to fight. And it's, to me, it kind of feels like two different streams of like activism for the queer community. In one case, it's like, no, we have to assimilate and just be like quiet and not disrupt or like cause waves. And then Boone is the kind who says, no, you have to protest, you have to fight, you have to be loud, and you can't be afraid of having to, cause a ruckus.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not even assimilation. It's going into hiding. It's praying that people don't notice you.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think assimilation implies something more generous, like we're like
We're
a certain
becoming a
level of
part of society
acceptance.
instead of hiding from it.
Right. Like
Yeah.
and Midian has that feeling of an explicitly queer space, like very much because it's a place where you don't have to pretend to be part of the wider society in that sense. You know, you can be yourself there. But the risk of having that sort of location is that eventually it will become a target.
I think it feels like a fairy tale too, right? Like once you enter, you can never leave. That issue that Boone has. It's like I literally just got here, and you're telling me I can't go up and save my ex-girlfriend from being murdered. It's like there have to be compromises around your queer spaces or your safe spaces. Like you can't just pull back from society and refuse to engage at that point. So.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that is not working out for them here. So yeah, we get a bunch of stuff. They release the Berserkers. Lausberg is killed in the process. What do we have? Yes, Decker decapitates Narcisse.
But it's off screen. I mean,
It is.
So it's a lot of fighting. But my issue with this climax, and again, I get it, but it's a lot of just watching. I mean, I love the Quill Lady set piece. I think it's fucking fantastic. Like that, it's very fun. She seduces men with her feminine wiles and her nude body, and then poisons all of them with her quills. But it's like Leigh said, we're seeing a lot of these mutants. Oh my god, these Nightbreed use their powers for the first time. So it's almost like episodic in ways, but it also feels very repetitive to me. So while this is 30 minutes of screen time, there's very little of consequence that actually happens here until we're getting to this berserker shit.
Right.
So those cops that were seduced by the Quill Lady, do you think that like if like given enough time, if they'd lived to see deviant art be a thing, like do you think that they'd be like into all that Sonic the Hedgehog art? Or
but I mean like again they're if we're going this queer angle here, it's like they're watching someone let's say a lesbian woman pose for them nude, and they're into it, which to me always calls to mind like how straight men are very much like lesbians are so hot, but gay men, ew, gross. So that to me is kind of a play on that.
I might even go one step like further removed from that and say that like, because I think in it almost is more like something more like less cisgender than that, I would say, like in the sense that like a lot of cis straight men think that they shouldn't be attracted to trans women, for example.
Okay.
So I think that maybe it like tracks with that a little bit more, just because it's something that they find alluring that maybe they shouldn't, but it still has a power over them. Whereas I think
forbidden fruit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you said like cis straight men, but I actually think that applies to cis men in general. Because I mean, like, like on the apps, even like, I mean, like I've seen trans men on the apps, and I feel like they always. Oh god, they always like it sounds so like I'm generalizing, but it's like there's it's like there's always it's like a threshold they have to cross to be like, oh, by the way, I'm a trans man. And that they feel the need to like to make it like that kind of a thing, which I understand why that is the case, because I'm sure that they've had reactions that are negative towards that statement.
Absolutely.
But I don't know what my point was here. I was just like, I don't know. Like, I understand, because I've talked to a trans person, several trans people on the apps, and had conversations like this too, where It's been more kind of like I don't know, like I feel bad that you have to like come in here with this kind of caveat, like, and it shouldn't be a caveat.
That disclosure feels like a requirement.
Yeah, just that. So yes,
But I think that that's not an uncommon thing, and it reminds me a little bit of our earlier conversation where we talked about things like biphobia, and I recognize like often when Trace and I ourselves even make references, it'll be like, oh, gay or lesbian, and it's like we often present it like it's a dichotomy, like, oh, okay, but there are other members of the queer umbrella that we should be thinking about and referencing. Even Trace, as you were mentioning, people having to self-declare on the apps. I'm thinking,
Right.
oh, there was a while where because of the way that HIV was transmitted and because we didn't have PrEP or we didn't feel as confident, there was a lot of people who felt very uncomfortable or felt like they had to disclose the nature of their status, right? It was like that was one of the boxes that you felt like you had to talk about. And I mean, I think one of the things that I take away from Nightbreed is this idea that the queer community is multifaceted and we can coexist like equitably and have those independent spaces, but we can live comfortably together. And it's something of a utopia that I think we could strive for, because too often we lament this idea that there's still a lot of boundaries and separations and siloing that happen within the queer community, where people say, oh, well, it's gay and lesbian. It's like, no,
Well,
it's a lot more than that.
But it's also equating gender with genitalia, right? Like, so it's like, you may have a pre-op trans man who's like, I'm a man, but they'll get with another man who's like, oh, I thought you were a man. And like, it's, but they're surprised / shocked / upset that there's not a penis there. And that's the issue, right? We're equating gender with genitalia. I don't know. Sorry, I like went off on that. Sorry, I digress too much, but it's something that is not unique to the straight community. I think is that.
Yeah, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. And
okay, well, let's go back to a big moment in the film. This is where Deckard and Boone take turns penetrating each other with Deckard's sword / knife.
I will say, I mean, this I'm saying this reminded me of Hook, but I think Hook came out after this.
It did. It absolutely did.
But
What
yeah,
you're saying is that Spielberg stole from Clive Barker.
100%. I was like, oh, this whole fight scene, like this 5-minute fight scene on these rope bridges, like it's beautiful. Like the set design here looks great.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very much like, oh, this is Hook.
I just think, to me, this is very much the way we talk about Scream with Billy and Stu penetrating each other with the knife. It's like, here's Clive Barker doing it 6 years earlier, because it's very much like Boone gets impaled through the back and then he embraces Deckard, like rams the sword through him, penetrating him, and then it's kind of what Deckard always wanted, right?
And he's got like an ace of hearts like impaled on the sword, like on his chest too. Like it's very like, oh, this is like the centerpiece of your house of cards. And fuck you, I'm stabbing you with it.
It's a little on the nose, a little bit.
But I love it because it seems so obvious, but there's still a ton of people who would look at this and be like, oh, it's just like a fight and Deckard gets killed and then he falls off the edge and that's the end of the bad guy. And you're like, no, the good guy just penetrated the bad guy who like was his first.
But you guys, I'm a test audience member in 1989 and I am like, but I really hate that Deckard dies. I mean, like, I really want more of this character.
I mean, sure, give him his own prequel spinoff if you must. But yeah, his parents were killed in a back alley, and his mom's pearls fell to the ground. And
no, his mom was pushed off a cliff by a button.
Yes.
Oh. That's gonna play great in a year.
Yeah, when this episode comes out audio only, that's gonna be like nobody's gonna remember what that was about.
You know what? If you can't remember, that's your problem.
I'm
That's
gonna
not
have
our problem.
I'm gonna have this edited and scheduled a year in advance, and like when it finally comes out, I'm like, oh my god, right, I did do that.
Right. We did make those weird diversions that none of us knew what we were talking about, but it was great conversation.
Fine. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so Deckard is dead. He's gone. And this is where the god Baphomet renames Boone Cabal and declares him basically the Nightbreed savior and says, hey, you need to take your people and guide them to safety.
And he specifically says, like, you destroyed this place. It's your responsibility to rebuild it.
I mean,
like,
he did. He is
But
responsible.
it was
Weilberg was not
prophesized.
wrong.
It was prophesized. Like it was that. It's on the fucking wall. Y'all knew this was gonna happen.
I mean, he doesn't know that. He's disembodied limbs in a basement. Like,
What's up with his deal? Like, I kind of love the representation of a god as just like a giant gaudy statue with bad lighting.
You know, so when Baphomet comes out, he has this little like the crown of horns or like antler shit.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that looks really familiar. Where have I seen that before? It's Hannibal. Brian Fuller 100% stole the stole. He
oh dear,
borrowed
he
the
drew
Baphomet design for Hannibal. Like, cause yeah, there's a whole thing where Hannibal's black, solid black, and has the antlers. I'm like, oh, that's Baphomet.
Oh.
Well, and Baphomet is God, I don't know what religion Baphomet is from, but it like that is like a an ancient god in one of,
I want to say Egyptian.
He was a deity that the Knights Templar were accused of worshiping.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And he is a goat. He's a goat demon. A goat deity.
Right. Okay.
Right on.
Honestly, looks a lot like Payman from Hereditary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. So Boone and Laurie escape and they leave Priest Ashbury to, get disfigured as the roof collapses and blah, blah, blah. Big extravaganza, lots of special effects. So this is where we get Laurie's big thing where she pledges that she will accompany Boone regardless of where he goes. And he's like, well, I'm kind of Nightbreed now, babe, so I don't really swing that way anymore. And she's like, cool, I took Deckard's sword and I'm just going to...
Well, because she calls him out because he's like, I'll come back for you. And she's like, what, when I'm fucking 90? No, thank you. I admit, I mean, again, like I took issue with this and I still do a little bit because I'm just like, okay, so we have to have this woman literally die by suicide to be with the man that she wants to be with. As we said earlier, I appreciate it more when we put this queer allegory on. I think it works better that way.
Right.
But in a literal sense, this really does rub me the wrong way.
It strikes me, it reminds me of like the depictions of desperate women who can't live without men, so they trap them like with children or other things, and you're just like, it feels like it diminishes Laurie's character if you look at it from a traditional point of view, because she's a woman who's like, oh my God, I can't live without this man. You're like, you didn't seem that close to begin with.
Yeah, it really is. It's very much the storytelling model of you need the breeding pair at the end of the story to be together. You need the romantic interest. And like really, other than serving as the point of view character during Act 2, Laurie doesn't really have like
she gets lost.
Function. She really is just our window into this world where Boone doesn't serve as that the way it's written. And it just like you have to contrive this way in order for them to be together at the end. And like I think as far as like the queer allegory is concerned, I think it does work, but it is motivated, I think, by this sort of like problematic trend of screenwriting, particularly in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Where like you've got a man and a woman, of course they end up together at the end of the movie. Like that's
Yeah.
But again, it's so interesting coming from a queer creator. But again, I also feel like the studio pressure on that, right?
He's playing within the Hollywood conventions, right? It's very
Mhm.
much like, well, you better give us a fucking happy ending if you're gonna kill our Decker.
Well, I mean that goes back to like the origins of film too. Like
Yeah.
that's like that's some like straight up westerns. Like it either ends in a wedding or a funeral sort of shit, you know?
Right. In this case, both, right?
Yeah.
Like she dies, and then we kind of get I guess, a de facto marriage because they're going to be stuck together forever.
So, I just want to point. So the theatrical cut of this movie, Boone leaves Midian with Laurie and meets with the remaining Nightbreed in a barn, where he says his goodbyes to Narcisse, who's still alive, and promises to find a place where they will be safe. In the ruins of Midian, Ashbury stands in front of Decker's corpse and states he wants vengeance on Baphomet and the breed. When he presses Baphomet's blood to Decker's wound, Decker springs back to life with a scream as Ashbury repeatedly hollers, "Hallelujah." Cut to black. Written and directed by Clive Barker.
I do think that's interesting. I don't know how satisfying I find it, but yeah, I mean, in terms of like setting up a sequel, all of a sudden you've got two antagonists that I guess you would hypothetically know the priest more because he got more screen time in that cut too.
Because the way that the director's cut ends is so we do still have Father Ashbury as a villain. Like he's like, cool, I'm gonna kill the Nightbreed. Right. But we also have Boone doesn't make it to that barn. Yeah. It is just the Nightbreed waiting for Boone, as we have Boone and Laurie on top of a hill fade into the wall painting of these people on a hill. So it's like, cool. Now we're cutting to black or written credits.
It's a lot more ambiguous. I mean, there's very much still the indication that, oh, okay, Laurie and Boone will now go and find these people, and Priest Ashbury will pursue them.
Yeah,
but we don't know. But I kind of, I don't know. It feels old school Hollywood to end with this like almost freeze frame of like, oh, good, heteronormative man and woman back together on the top of the hill.
Yeah.
But I think, we as queer people subvert that and say like, okay, so now this queer community will have to seek out a new home and decide like, how do they want to fit into culture?
Which really fits in, I mean, like, again, like any kind of queer bar that has been burned to the ground by police. Look at fucking Stonewall. Like I get it. Like you have to find a new safe haven.
Well, and it really feels like they're setting up this second movie to be like a Moses exile in the desert sort of thing. And I don't know exactly how Ashbury would factor into that as the villain, but like
I'm sorry. I mean,
and this is all speculation on my part.
But the thing with Ashbury is that you were bringing in now an explicitly religious antagonist.
Yep.
And that's fascinating to me. I love that. But the fact is that Ashbury was he literally says, "There's no evil here. Don't do this," to the cops. And then all of a sudden he's like, kill the Nightbreed.
Yeah, his heel turn really doesn't make any sense.
No.
Well, it doesn't even really make sense why the cops brought him in the first place. Like I don't really understand why they brought him along. Like, is the idea that like he's a priest, so he's going to be good against demons? Like
maybe.
I don't know.
Never say.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's Nightbreed.
Yeah.
Do we have final thoughts? And Leigh, I will give this floor to you right now.
Sure. So I know that we spend a lot of this time sort of like picking at it and like dissecting this movie and like kind of pointing out things that don't work. But I think at least I do that out of a place of love, because I think that there's so much in this movie that's just fascinating and interesting that it's a great movie to pick apart. And I think it's really interesting to sort of see what the intent was and where it succeeds. And like, yeah, it's kind of a messy, sort of incomplete movie, as we've said, but it's fascinating and there are a lot of cleaner movies that that don't have as much depth or nuance or mineability as this movie does, and I that's why I really enjoy watching it, because it's and it's just fun. Like Buttonface is a great villain. I see Joe's laughing at Buttonface again.
Love it.
But yeah, it's just a very enjoyable ride, even on the surface level. But it's so much deeper than that, and that's why I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I know out of the three of us, I like this movie the least, but that's not, again, it's not to say that I dislike it. And there are plenty of my movies that I have given 5 stars that I enjoy picking apart, because I think they're fun to pick apart, even though I have such reverence for them. And I think that's something that a lot of people misconstrue, like whether we say something is problematic or if we say something is flawed. It's like, I'm not saying that the movie is bad. I'm not saying that the movie doesn't deserve to be seen, but it's a movie that I appreciate, that I enjoy talking about. And this one is something that, again, this is the 3rd or 4th time I've seen this movie. And I've grown to appreciate it more each time. It's not one of my favorites. But again, like we discussed, there's so many things to discuss and unpack here. I have more fun talking about this movie than I do watching it. And that's not to say that I don't think the movie's good. It's just, I think it's a fascinating movie, and I'm glad that we get to discuss it here.
Yeah. I definitely agree with both of you. For me, this is just another example of how vital Clive Barker is to our community. And people know that I'm like a big Clive Barker fan. Like I'm on my soapbox here, but to me, he's a quintessential queer director. Like, his voice is unique. It's different. He's willing to go to unexpected, uncomfortable, challenging places. And I think that that's so vital, particularly like the value of this film in particular is it's watching this person who does not fit the mold of what will work in Hollywood try to play within the system, but also deliver an unabashedly queer text that is confrontational, that is murky and weird and challenging. And seeing him try to compromise or fit what will work for this North American audience and not quite hit, I think has led us to some really interesting places. For me, it's also sad because I think this is the end of the road. Like, when we get to him in Lord of Illusions, it feels like a more defeated Clive Barker, and that film seems less adventurous and less risky and far more willing to just be like, yeah, I'll give you what you want, with a couple of weird twists in the mix. But it's also not Hellraiser, which is like uniquely him and risky and audacious, but also very independent and like not fitting what Hollywood was doing at that particular moment. So this is kind of an iconic piece for me because it tells a lot about where Clive Barker was in his career, but it's also a film like, we will never get a Nightbreed film because it didn't work in 1990, and it certainly would not fucking work now when we're in the day and age of like Hollywood blockbusters.
Well, there was going to be that TV show. But I think that's fallen apart now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're getting a Hellraiser show and a Hellraiser movie, which...
Yeah.
Okay.
Supposedly. We have directors. We have no casting. They haven't started, but
yeah,
we'll see. I'm glad that we have Nightbreed because I think it tells us a lot about some queer history, some queer ideology, and I'm glad for that. Do I want to watch this all the time? No, but I'm very happy that it exists in the world, if for no other reason than people will seek it out and get to interpret it in their own unique way.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I did not rehearse a conclusion to this episode. So, Leigh, thank you for coming on to this to discuss this. Again, it's always nice to have someone who's very passionate about the film we're discussing, and we both know that you are. And it's been a pleasure to have you again.
Of
Mhm.
course, anytime I'm happy to do this.
Oh my god. Okay, cool. Awesome. We're gonna bring it back all the time. But everyone,
I mean,
I'm
you
just gonna
should
fucking-
ask Leigh how people can get a hold of them.
Oh, right. God, I'm not used to this format. Leigh, where can people find you on social media? And do you want to? Nope. Just whatever. Talk about what you want to talk about.
Okay. Yeah. So you can find me on Twitter. That's at Leigh Monson PBF.
But yeah, well, thank you again. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at Horror Queers, and join our Facebook Horror Queers group to hang out with other listeners. You can also find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered, and of course, look at our YouTube channel for, well, maybe not this, but like, we cover micro queers, our queer horror shorts on YouTube, which is really fun. But on that note, I think we can cross out once and for all Nightbreed.
Indeed, yes. And we'll cross out horror queers.